So I think it's become more difficult for companies, but there are strategies they can employ. And I really think parties to international tech mergers, often where markets can be global, but they need to consider how global competition concerns will impact national and regional markets, and how individual regulators will look at those. So I think in particular they need to have a detailed consideration of local market conditions, what are customers going to say, what are competitors going to say, and those may differ between jurisdictions, and that's really a must. Looking at how the Commission adopted a different approach from the CMA and Booking.com, for example, and we haven't had sight of the full decision. But from the outside, it looks like the theories of harm were very similar, but they came to different views. Potentially, they were getting different views from the market. We don't know that yet. And I think a traditional kind of one size fits all remedy package that we might have been used to previously in other industries, where you might have been able to align regulators around the world, um, might prove a forlorn hope in many tech cases involving digital markets, as we've seen. Um, and so I think really to try to mitigate that risk, we're looking at prolonged pre-notification processes to try and get regulators comfortable with the substance of the case, and to try and potentially warm them up to a remedy earlier on in the process to test their views on it, and align them with other regulators. I think those remedy proposals are going to have to be flexible. We saw that to some extent in the Microsoft Activision deal, where a revised deal with a kind of a fix it first remedy was submitted to the CMA and ultimately approved. And that was different to what was agreed with the European Commission. And then I think kind of looking at staggered submissions to allow regulators to consider those packages in unison, and getting the timing of that right, taking into account the timetables of the different regulators, will go some way to reducing the risk. Um, but I think those things will have to be strategized in detail early on, and also risk allocation. So looking at how you're going to allocate risk in the transaction documents, in terms of agreeing to kind of hell or high water type obligations, or break fees if things go wrong, will also be more and more important in the tech context.
Um, yeah, and I would say that no jurisdiction is more hostile to remedies these days than the United States. The agencies, the DOJ in particular, has taken a very strong position that only a very strong structural remedy, divestiture remedy of an entire business is sufficient to address concerns. Um, I think this, at the same time, there's a tension when you are moving into more novel theories of harm that aren't easily susceptible to structural remedies. And I think that is where you're seeing particular divergence in the European Union, which may be more open to administering behavioral remedies, supply commitments, access commitments, open offers, and the UK and the US, who are more opposed to it, although we've seen some signs from the FTC they may be more open to behavioral remedies to address their more novel concerns. I think eh, the when you're talking about structural remedies, divestitures, I think it's very important that companies think long and hard about what's in and what's out, what's really needed for the divestiture buyer to compete, who your divestiture buyer is, and making sure that you have the levers that you need if you do take a commercial approach to have a narrower remedy, to make sure that the levers are in place to have some flexibility, as Lauren said. And you need to be prepared to, in the US, increasingly parties are engaging in fix it first, taking a pre-baked remedy to the agency and then taking it to court and litigating the sufficiency of the remedy in court. I think in the US, if you have a complex deal that has potential divestitures, you really need to be prepared as a company to present a package, not just to the agency, but to a court, to to show its sufficiency. And we have seen a number of cases where parties have succeeded on the sufficiency of the remedy in court that wasn't accepted by the regulators in the first instance. Um, Otherwise, I think you need to be very careful about understanding the local nuance in the different jurisdictions that you're approaching, and making sure that you don't blindly assume that an approach that works in the US or in Europe will work in every jurisdiction as well. I think we are very regularly seeing different types of remedies to address different local issues, whether that is supply commitments in China, um, to ensure that that critical inputs are still being supplied to the Chinese market, subject to restrictions in other jurisdictions. Um, South Africa, of course, has very specific focus in merger review on social commitments to South Africa, making sure that you factor all of those into your policy and all the pieces work together from the beginning, so that you know what you're going into. You have a plan to make everything work, and you have a backup to defend that in the courts if needed.